And we are live, ladies. Welcome. Welcome to everyone joining us here on LinkedIn today. My name's Jodie Getty. One of the co-founders here at Circling, and really excited to spend a little bit of time today talking with two fabulous other parents and women talking about the power of storytelling. So I'd like to welcome Kate Greig, who's the Workplace Relations Manager at Programmed, and Tanya Neary, who's one of the directors at Culture Amp. So welcome, ladies.
Thanks, Jodie.
So as I said,
thank you.
We're going to talk about storytelling, and it's something that we love and truly believe in here at Circling. And I often say there's no better way to drive cultural change than through the power of real stories. So we know that, on our platform, we've got lots of advice and resources, but the stories are without doubt, the number one feature of the site and what people love most. And I think it's fair to say that, it's through reading other people's stories that you feel inspired and supported to know that you're not alone. And what's fabulous, Kate and Tanya have both been participants and shared their real story on the platform and gone on to inspire many others at Programmed and Culture Amp. So excited to have them here with us today and share their journey and why they believe stories are really important. So with that, I might hand over to you both and get you to introduce yourself and share a little bit about your story and more with the audience here today. So Kate, we'll start with you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for having me. So my baby arrived on the 31st of December, 2019, last day of the decade. What a day.
What a day.
A little bit early. Yeah. So I took parental leave for the first half of the year, came back to work on a full-time basis in the first week of July and switched roles with my husband at that point, but we were working from home at that point, so it was just like, instead of going to the lounge room one week, the next week I just started going into the turning left at a different door in the hallway at that point. So I had the first half of the year off on parental leave, and my husband has had the second half of the year off on his parental leave through his very generous parental leave scheme through his employer. So back full-time in July with a 6-month-old, which is probably, now that I didn't really think about it in a lot of detail before I made that decision, but now that I do think about it, sometimes I wonder if I would have made a different decision with the benefit of wisdom that I have now. But it's awesome working from home. I'm still working from home 5 days a week, which is great, so I can zip out and get a cuddle and say hello or be a spare pair of hands when need be. But I don't have to do all the tricky stuff at the moment, like daycare orientations. My husband is doing all of that. I don't have to deal with the guilt associated with all of that. But I do. I early on in my journey as a parent, I had a lot of trouble with breastfeeding, and I just didn't know that was something that people had a lot of trouble with, and that was, I've never really thought of myself as an overly maternal person. I hadn't asked a lot of questions about it, certainly hadn't done a lot of reading about it, but I just thought that I was going to be one of those people that can just, drape a nice wrap or cloth over my shoulder in a cafe and get them out and just, go about my life all very simply. And the reality was really something quite different for me. And I definitely struggled with that a lot. And, rightly or wrongly, or probably more irrationally felt a bit of shame about it, even though I was like, well, it's fine because she's getting fed, we're topping up with formula, we're doing what we need to do, and I have no trouble with any of that. And I was always fully prepared, happy for that to be the case if I couldn't just exclusively breastfeed. But because I was struggling, idea that it just couldn't come. I had a cesarean, we had delayed attachment because I was in recovery for quite a while afterwards, a lot of difficulties, and the potential for breastfeeding to be difficult for me. I guess I just started telling everybody about it, even people that didn't have babies. And what I learned from that, and in fact, the most valuable story came to me was from a friend who doesn't have children. But she said, that happened to my other friend. This is what she did. This is what she said was difficult for her. She tried this different pump. She, so it just, that oversharing that comes with being, I guess, a new parent. And I guess the support and the comfort and the good advice that I've been able to get from just talking about my boobs with people.
I think it removes a lot of guilt. I think, when you hear from others, and that's what we often say, everybody has a story to share. Often I know when I ask people in organizations and they say, I'm not sure, I don't really have a story. I say, you absolutely do. There's always some way that you can inspire others. So thank you, Kate, for sharing. Tanya, do you want to share a little bit about your journey and specifically, the story you shared with the Culture App team?
So for me, kind of similar story. I had I had gestational diabetes, which in itself was a whole separate thing. So I had to have, I tried to do, I had to be induced and then ended up having a cesarean. So I think for me, kind of, the whole thing was just, I like to be in control. I'm used to having control of my work and used to, being a planner. And I definitely thought I empathized with parents before I had a baby. I tried to be really supportive of my team if they needed time off. Never an issue, but I just don't think you fully understand it until you go through it. And I think for me, it felt like a baptism of fire. Those first 3 weeks, just, you're coming down from all the drugs that you've had in the cesarean, you're just trying to breastfeed. And that was very stressful for me as well. I did a breastfeeding class, world's most naive parent going in. I was like, I'll probably take 3 months off and then I'll put her into daycare. And then breastfeeding will be fine because I've done one class on it and it's the only class my husband didn't come to. And in hindsight, it probably doesn't at times seem like that would be a useful class for partners, but I think 100% if I had to go back, I would definitely have him along. Just a second set of ears, just something, because it was so tough. I remember him sitting, like, trying to get milk and help me get milk, and it was just so stressful. And you have these expectations of yourself, but I think a big thing for me was stepping out of work, knowing that I felt supported and knowing that, I could take my time. There was no kind of stipulation on you have to be back, and the contact that people kept up throughout. Always very mindful of, do I want to be in contact here and what's happening? Do I not want to be? And one of the big things for me around storytelling was I was a fiend for the internet and just looking up things and, trying to get these validation points and what happens if you don't breastfeed, or what happens if this, and what happens. And you can always find the horror stories. You'll always find something that kind of validates what you're thinking, and that's just dangerous. So one of the great things for me was the circle in stories, like reading different stories around people going back to work at different stages, because everyone I was talking to was taking a year or two off. And I knew that probably wasn't something that we could do. So hearing some woman went back at 6 weeks, it just gave me, it gave me such a sense of comfort. And that might not be, I should have had a comfort from my own decision, but that just wasn't the case. So reading those stories I found really, really helpful.
Yeah, I think that's great. So, there's lots of parenting blogs out there, and I think, we jump on those blogs for advice, as you said, but I think, stories are so powerful. So tell us about how you think, the stories on the platform compare to parenting blogs.
Oh, I'll have a horror story. Surprise, but I went on looking at what's the ideal time to put your child in childcare. Stupid. You already know that I shouldn't be going on looking at that. It just has to suit our situation. And I ended up down this rabbit hole of some guy that went to Stanford telling people that it was something like parents before, gran before, nan before childcare. So he was basically saying the child should always be with the parent, and if not the grandparents, if not a nanny, and then if not childcare. There was some poor woman on there that was like, I'm raising my child on my own and I have to work. And he's just like, well, tough. And I remember thinking, this is so dangerous. The importance of going to like a reliable source that will responsibly share information and stories and not just ram up people's opinions down your throat was a big one for me. So that is why something like Circle In, where I just knew it felt like real stories, different stories. Everyone wasn't doing the same thing. Not everyone was taking the same amount of time off. People were very different. That I think is a big thing. Like, I just think it's so dangerous when you're in that state and in that zone, and could be 3 a.m. and you've just rang the maternal health line because, you know, breastfeeding's gone arseways, and then you're thinking about other things. And yeah, so that for me is like, there's a responsible storytelling.
Yeah. And Kate, tell us about like how much have you enjoyed reading about, you know, your peers and other employees at programs as opposed to, you know, on a general blog?
Yeah, great question. So I love that. And in fact, when I first got access to the real stories, I was scrolling through looking for my colleagues, not because I was being nosy, but because it feels closer to home. It's more relatable to me. And I wanted to hear about the experience of my colleagues, one becoming parents, but also their experience of how they returned to our workplace and how they managed that juggle. So incredibly valuable to me, who was looking, you know, I wanted to be able to relate. But I think we also, when we read these stories, we want to know that, you know, we're doing something right. Like, I was always looking for that relatability. Oh, I'm doing something like that too. I must be doing something right, you know? Or at least not doing anything wrong. So, and I love, what I love about it is, I think that I've had to ban myself from quite early on from Googling these sorts of things, because it's just like Tanya's example, can be extremely unhelpful and very dangerous. But this is moderated content, which is purely designed to support and lift people up and help them on their parenting journey. So I found it incredible and just so great to see how my colleagues are managing the juggle and managing that return to work.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point. And I know, you know, you're both senior leaders. Do you feel like this has encouraged you now to lead differently, you know, be more open with your story and encourage others to share? Because one of the things we talk a lot about is role modelling. And, you know, the power of role modelling at a senior leader level to really create a culture that supports working parents. So do you feel like that's influenced your own style and leadership style?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely for me, absolutely. I mean, look, I don't, none of my current reports or none of the people who are reporting into me at the moment have children, but it's made me think really long and hard about, you know, if that time does come, how I will support them. And it's like when you have a child, and people without children can be incredible leaders of people without children. You know, people leaders without children can still be incredible leaders of parents. But for me, I guess because I hadn't spent any time thinking about it, I feel like I've got this really great insight now that will help me, you know, when people in my team do decide to go, if they do decide to have that parenting journey. And yeah, look, I'm an oversharer. I think I probably always have been, and parenting certainly hasn't changed that. It's made me a bit more of an oversharer, but I love it. I love sort of hearing everybody's experiences and how different it can be, and how many different ways that you can make parenting and being a working parent work for you. I mean, the sky's the limit, really.
Yeah. Definitely. And don't ever change. Being an overshare, I think, is fabulous. What about you, Tanya? Has it made you lead differently, or?
I would say so. I think for me, as I was mentioning before this chat, that, you know, I always empathized with parents. Like, I could understand and that this was hard, but I didn't really know. And also for my team members that don't have children, it just opened up more about focusing on life as opposed to just career. So I always cared about the team and obviously gave them the space to do what they need to do. But I think this was a next level. This was showing a bit of a vulnerable side of me, because I was paranoid about coming back and just talking about my kid all the time and taking out 100 photos, and everyone, like, she doesn't talk about anything else than her kid. So I think I have a responsibility to show a bit of part of that of my life, and that may encourage others to do the same. So that feels like a big responsibility. And the founders at Culture Amp have always done that. They have always made, it's called, I think they call it visible parenting or something. So instead of the skulking out on Friday at 3 p.m. because they're going off to watch their kids' basketball game or to teach, they make it quite obvious that that's where they're going. They tell people, and that's always been the way. And seeing the Circle In stories come into my inbox and one of my founders or one of my colleagues reading that story, you just might not, we only have 200 in our Melbourne office, but you just might not get to cross over with everyone and hear those stories. So that has been great, just that visibility and talking about it, because I think the pandemic more than anything else has really shown us what's important, whether you have children or not, and just having that those conversations, that vulnerability, that real life, I think it makes you a better leader.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into the next topic, and that's around, parenting during lockdown. And it's fair to say that it's been one of the most challenging years of our lives. Can you talk to me about the support that your company's provided and how it's really brought parents together and how important it's been during lockdown? Maybe Tanya, I know you were just starting to touch on that. Talk to us about what Culture Amp and the support that's been provided.
Yeah, I think for a lot of companies, they can be more flexible with parents and they can actually do more, bring on platforms like this, have that visible parenting, but it's just a bit too hard basket for them. And I think what's going to happen is they're going to lose people because they are not that type of organization. So I think for us from day one, our founders, empathized with people. There's people that might have had 2 parents in the household and 2 kids, and they're trying to work and they can't get the help, and it was just bonkers. So it was like, we understand. It was always very vocal within our internal channels that we understand people are having a tough time. People that may be just single parents and are working, so there's literally nobody to take the child. So having the conversations, understanding that it's tough, talking about it, normalizing it, making sure that it's okay and you don't have to hide it. And it's probably been my favorite part, to get a glimpse into people's lives and just see that, that other side to them. It leads to just such, I think, richer conversations.
Yeah, you're spot on. What about you, Kate? How has programs supported you during lockdown?
Oh, it's been incredible. So my boss in particular has always had a very flexible approach to work. I think the attitude has always been, don't really care where you are or when it gets done, as long as it's getting done. So that focus more on output and quality of work rather than, I need you to be chained to your desk for 38 hours a week minimum, which I think is incredibly helpful and is definitely the right attitude. And I'm hoping we're seeing more people move towards that style of leadership now, if we've learned anything from coronavirus. But I think for me, I've felt very supported to be very transparent. And, I just say, look, husband needs a hand, or husband's got to go to a doctor's appointment. I'm going to step out for an hour or so and be mum. I'll be back at my desk later. And, that's just never a problem. And I've never been made to feel awkward or guilty for having to do that. I've always felt 100% supported to be able to juggle both of those things when I need to. It's been amazing. I think the only thing, and I think the thing I've sort of struggled with a little bit with coronavirus or returning during lockdown is I've had this 6 months out of the workforce, and people get used to you not being there, so they become dependent on your colleagues, which is so great for their development. But I think in those first couple of months, because we weren't in the office, it was harder to reestablish those relationships or for people to know that you were back. So there was definitely that little bit of, people, I'm not needed anymore. People, don't need me. What am I doing here? So occasionally you would have that existential sort of, maybe I'm redundant, maybe no one cares that I'm back, but that's over and done with in a couple of months. And it's kind of nice to be able to use that parental leave absence as a way to build up and develop your team as well. Like, what an amazing opportunity, developmental opportunity for them.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So, we've spoken a lot about culture and how important it is, and especially to create a culture that supports working parents and caregivers. And we know that, when you provide the right support, the benefits in terms of, their parents are more engaged and they're more likely to, advocate for your organisation. I guess, you're both really lucky to work for companies that have an amazing culture and provide great support to working parents. For people watching this that perhaps don't have that level of support or are looking to do something, what are some things that you think are really important to implement to support working parents? Tanya, maybe we'll start with you, because I know, you've got Slack channels, for example, so it doesn't have to be, a really hard and difficult program. It's some simple things that can have such a huge impact. Is that right?
Yeah, I think starting with the team around you, like I'm incredibly lucky to have a team of the team that I look after are amazing and so supportive, and then also just our regional lead and other people. Just you come back and you can lose a bit of confidence, and you don't know, kind of, you're just trying to resettle yourself. So having those people around you, I think that will, be a bit of a cheerleader for you, and tell you things are going to be okay when you're getting a bit shaky, I think is number one. And the team that I work with day in, day out are amazing, and our regional lead and wider team. But I think the simple things that our ERG caregiver group are talking about, like maybe having a buddy when you come back. Now that seems weird. I've been at Culture around 5 years. Why would I have a buddy when I come back? I know people, but so much has happened, and maybe that's a fellow parent that has gone through it themselves recently. So kind of that level of help, and just having it there. And hey, if you don't need it after a while, that's okay. I think it's just pretty simple things. It's just that support, starting the conversation, and getting a few people interested in it. I think simple things like that can make all the difference, because it just needs one conversation or one story to kind of give you a sanity check when you're about to lose it.
Yeah, there's nothing more powerful than letting, future employees know that you're a family-friendly workplace. It's pretty powerful. Tanya, before we move to Kate, I'd love you just to touch, for people listening that aren't familiar with the term ERG, obviously Employee Resource Group. Can you just tell us about how you have that at Culture Amp, and what it looks like, and the role of it? Because I think, again, that's another really easy thing to implement to really drive that culture of supporting working parents.
Yeah, so we have a few different camps, and it's quite simple in our comm system. We use Slack, how we use it. So as a starting point, we kind of have ERG parents and caregivers. We have ERG camp out allies, climate crisis, colour activists. So it's sending a signal that this is a safe space as an organisation to start those conversations. That seems really simple, but there's plenty of traditional organisations that I work with that just didn't have or wouldn't be interested in doing that. So I think the company identified that this is a big deal. This is something that people want to talk about, and we need a safe space to do it. So, it might even be someone just posting saying, I've had a horrendous day and I'm really losing it. I literally do not know how I can continue to work and look after my child. And maybe you're feeling the same, and suddenly it's like, okay, it's not just me, because you can have the perception that everyone else has it together and you're the only one that doesn't. So that's something that we're big on, making the space for those conversations, and that sets the tone for what's important to us as for conversations.
Yeah, I think they're amazing. I think, we see them a lot in the US, especially with the US companies we work with. ERGs are quite, the norm in terms of within companies, and I think we're starting to see them a lot more here in Australia. So I think, that's great insight, and I love how you framed it as a safe space, which I think for a lot of parents they need, which is kind of why we do the stories as well. Kate, talk to us about, what you feel are some of the things that companies could implement to support parents, maybe things that you've done at program that have worked really well.
Sure. So, I mean, I look at our portal, our Circle In portal. The HR team have set up like a channel on our Microsoft Teams, which was really just part of the keeping connected, I think, process for when the pandemic hit. But, there's a number of useful resources that are linked to on there as well. I think probably with me, what I did was I sort of made a point of seeking out working parents that I had a relationship with, and one to connect with them and catch up, because we couldn't, have those water cooler conversations anymore, but also quiz them. I was just quizzing everyone I could, every opportunity I got, about how they managed their juggle. And I found that really comforting, and people at various different stages of their parenting journey as well. Like, some just returned from parental leave like me, others who had children who were much older, but I've always really appreciated their insight and their wisdom into this. And so I just now continue to quiz working parents whenever I can. And I think it links back to what we were talking about with those real stories. It's really just another form of storytelling. So I've always found that incredibly valuable, and I do plan to keep doing that as my journey evolves. I think the other thing for me, probably with my HR hat on here, is what is really crucial is the leadership of line managers, people with line management responsibility for people who are going on parental leave and returning from parental leave. Their attitude and how they support those people is crucial. I mean, you can have all the policies, you can have the values, but if your line managers aren't living it, and aren't doing everything they can to get the best out of this person, then what's the point of the rest of it? The line manager is crucial here. So I think support, we have to support them. We have to make sure that those line managers have all the resources at their fingertips, that they maybe they need to understand how other managers are supporting people on parental leave and returning from parental leave. So for me, I think from a leadership and HR perspective, that relationship and how that particular leader is supported is crucial.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you've brought that up, Kate. It's something I personally am very passionate about, the role that managers play through the journey. And, even if I look back at my own personal journey, I had 2 different managers. I've got 2 young girls, and both my experiences were completely different. And I know when we surveyed our broader community and spoke to over 1,000 working parents, 52% told us that they believed senior leaders in their organisation did not role model support for working parents. Like, that's more than 1 in 2. And it really does start from the top. So I think that's where, when you tell those stories and you can have senior leaders, I mean, I love nothing more than when we see a CEO share their real story, the cultural change that can drive and trickle down. Let people know that they head out at 4 o'clock on a Friday for school pickup, or to go watch, their kids play sport. It's a really amazing thing to, I think, share with the broader organisation. So final question for you both. What's, for people tuning in and listening, what's your one piece of advice, for working parents? I know you've only been back a few months, but, reflecting back and knowing what you do now, is there anything that you could pass on as a piece of advice? Tanya?
I think looking back, reflecting now, being back about 6 months, I actually thought that I was pretty okay coming back. Like, I could remember things. For some reason, I thought my brain would be wiped. I could remember things, and I knew, I still remembered how to do my job, but it actually wasn't that. It was kind of like what Kate touched on. It was like the reconnecting with the team. You're really close to these people. You've worked with them long hours for a long time. So I think it may not be immediately obvious what the hard stuff actually is. And for me, that came kind of later. So I kind of started off okay. And then I was like, oh my God, am I okay? I'm feeling overwhelmed. Like, I expected tears all the first week, and that didn't happen. As I was a month or 2 in, I'm like, okay, so this is different. So I think for me, it would be taking the time, backing yourself, but taking the time. You might be okay going back, or you may not be, but don't just kind of give your timeline of like 1 or 2 months. Like, you've been out for a long time, and you've been pregnant for 9 months before that. So yeah.
Great advice. What about you, Kate?
Yeah, I think I sort of have been reflecting on that, and whilst I thought I was easing back in quite easily, I can look back on that time now and go, I was actually struggling a bit. Like Tanya, I could remember how to do things, but I think because it was it was a huge shift. It was going from being at home with the baby 5 days a week to being in the study, not being with the baby 5 days a week. And that's a massive change just from a Friday to a Monday. And so I think because I was feeling a bit of guilt about all of that, I noticed that I was trying to control, and I was having a lot of unnecessary hormonal emotional reactions to things that I probably wouldn't have now. So look, I don't think I was being inappropriate or nasty or anything like that, but I think it was a heck of a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. So yeah, just
don't be too hard on yourself.
Don't think it's going to be easy. Yeah, don't be hard on yourself. It's not easy. It's not supposed to be easy. It's meant to be hard. Yeah.
And you know what? Thank you both for that. And I think, people used to say to me early on, oh, when you get to 12 months, it gets easier. And then the reality is there's challenges at every stage. My girls are 5 and 7 and we're moving into a whole different stage. And I think, I've shared my own personal journey a few times now. And at every stage, I've got something different to kind of pass on to others. So, be sure to keep sharing your story. I'm sure in 6 months you'll have more advice to pass on to others in your organisation. But, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your story within Culture Amp and Programmed. I've no doubt you've inspired many others. And I think, your advice today, we've spoken a little bit about, simple things that organisations can do aside from, implementing real stories, which to everyone listening, they're so easy to do, but yet so powerful. Think about, your Slack or Teams channel, if you have one. Think about creating an employee resource group. Think about the role that your leaders play and how you can really create that, encourage senior leaders to role model support for parents. So lots of great advice. Love the discussion, and thank you so much for everything. And be sure to keep sharing your stories, and I hope the stories that we keep delivering, to your organisations continue to inspire you.
Thanks, Jodie.
Thank you.
Thank you.